Hello, I'm Oleg. I'm a certified instructor for Unreal Engine and I'm teaching it for artists working in animation and film. Unreal Engine allows doing incredible things for the animation VFX industry, and the best part about Unreal is that it's under constant development and new features make it more powerful and flexible than ever. One of those new features is the material system called Substrate, and this video aims to do a nice and quick introduction from a point of view of someone working in animation or film. I'm not going to do anything fancy in this video, but I'm going to create a basic film and video project, user study content, and mess up with materials inside that. If you worked with materials before, you probably know that material editor looks like that. It's node-based editor, you read left to right, and the final node is usually the one with material definition. Material attributes, reg base color, metallic, emissive color, normal map, and so on. I'm opening one of the materials from the start to content to illustrate what I'm talking about. Unreal 5.3 introduced a new material system called Substrate, and if you follow Epic Games' direction of travel, sooner or later Substrate is going to replace the current way to create materials. The first step you need to do with Substrate is to enable it. Go to Project Settings, Rendering, and check the box Substrate Materials. Please note this action is not reversible, so there is no way back to convert from Substrate to existing materials. Also, in this video I'm using Unreal Engine 5.5, where Substrate is still experimental stage, and therefore I wouldn't suggest you to use Substrate for your production projects, with this version of Unreal at least. But exploring its features is absolutely fine, and we're going to do it now with enabling Substrate's materials and restarting the engine. After starting Unreal Engine, if I go inside Material Editor, I can see that it still has the visual node editor and seemingly keeps the node network had previously. Still have the same base color, roughness map, normal map defined using different nodes, but instead of one output node we can see two. The node for the material itself and the node called Substrate Shading Models, connected to the input called Front Material. What is that? If you think about visualizing objects, you can think about real-life materials that might have different layers, and the one is on the front is the one we see. So that analogy applies in here. I'm not going to explore how Unreal Engine converts old materials to substrate, but instead I'm going to create a substrate material to show you what it's all about. In a new folder called Materials, I'm going to create a basic material called m_basic. Behind the scenes, I'm going to import a model and a couple of textures for this model to illustrate the point of creating material later. Double click to open the material editor, and you can see that's not one but two nodes. One is the material attributes with input from the front material, and another node is material function called Substrate UE for default shading. I can note that it has inputs you would expect from the material definition, like base color, metallic, specular, roughness, normal, and so on. I'm connecting the output from texture sample nodes to base color, metallic, roughness, normal map, and so on. It depends on how many maps I've got and how many maps you can get for every single model. Now, by defining my material with connecting of texture maps with inputs in the node in the material function, I can see the way to define material in the good old way of Unreal Engine 4 and so on. But at the same time, I'm not in Unreal Engine 4, I'm in Unreal Engine 5, and I want to explore the power of a new material system. I'm going to create a new basic material. Now I'm going to delete Substrate UE for default shading node, and I'm going to create a new node called Substrate Slab. What is it? It's a part of material definition, like a slice of material or its layer. Some homogeneous materials will only have one slab, but multi-layer materials might have more than one. I will talk about that later. Also, I can notice the abbreviation BSDF. It stands for Bidirectional Scattering Distribution Function, and it's all about all the clever mathematics behind physically based rendering. In some way, BSDF tells us that Unreal Engine defines physically based materials using mathematics. The node Substrate Slab has multiple inputs, and some inputs will make more sense to you, especially if you work with materials not only in Unreal but also in DCTs like Maya. For example, the base color texture is also called albedo in other systems, so we can connect our color map texture to the diffuse albedo. Likewise, the normal map connects to the input called normal. The Substrate Slab will be the only node defining my material, so connect its output to the front material. If you don't have a roughness map, you can adjust values using constant nodes as you would do previously. For example, you can set a constant of 0.2 for smooth material and something closer to 1.0 for rough material. Let us try to create another material for a basic glass. Here I'm going to show that the same Substrate Slab node can be used for material that looks completely different. I'm going to connect constant 0 to roughness and constant 1 to subsurface scattering mean free path, abbreviated as SSMFP. It doesn't look like glass, right? But the glass is a transparent material, so we need to do something in material definition to reflect that. So we need to click on material nodes and change the blend mode from opaque to translucent gray transmittance. As you can see, blend mode for the materials is still very important. The material looks more like glass, and the only thing I would probably add to make it more realistic is some refraction. I need to enable refraction for the material, so I need to go to material settings and change the refraction method from none to something else. I will be using the index of refraction. After that, I can connect index of refraction to the node called Fresnel that gives the object a very nice and glassy look. So, in the short amount of time, we created not one but two materials from scratch, and we could see Substrate allows defining rather different materials using the same idea of Substrate Slab. But these two materials are single layer material. How about multi-layer materials? So, next step, I'm going to show how to create multi-layer materials very quickly. So, for this material, and I'm going to call it m_layered, I will create a Substrate Slab connecting textures t_wood_oak_d and t_wood_oak_n in the same way as I've done for my first example. Looks like the first basic material, right? But now I'm going to add another node called Substrate Single Coat. The purpose of this node is to define materials that look like coats of paint. It's also BSDF, meaning that we're still using clever mathematics to represent the physically based materials in real time. So I'm going to connect wood textures to diffuse albedo and normal of this node. And I'm going to connect Substrate Single Clear Coat to the front material attribute. After I apply this material, I can see it's rather smooth and reflective. Even if I set roughness to something high like 0.9, the material stays reflective. But that comes from the idea of a clear coat. So I'm going to use this clear coat as a top material, through which I will be able to see my wood material as a next layer. But first I'm going to replace the textures for the node Substrate Single Clear Coat to water textures, t_water_m for the diffuse albedo, and T underscore water underscore N for the normal map. The result of my model looks nothing like water, but it's not the point. The point is that I've got another material, another layer that looks different, and I will be using this difference to illustrate the point. We have multiple ways of defining multilayer materials with substrates, and all are relatively easy to compare with the old way of material layers before. The first way is to use the node called Substrate Horizontal Blend. Think about this node as something you would do in digital compositing, when you have the background, foreground, and you have clever algorithms to blend them together. That is what Substrate Horizontal Blend does. It takes two materials, background, foreground, and asks for a mixing factor. The Substrate Slab node with the wood textures will be the background, Substrate Single Clear Coats with water textures will be the foreground, and we can immediately see that we just defined multilayer material. If you haven't created multi-layer materials before, you can see how easy it is to do with Substrate. Can we play with this material more? I'm sure we can. A single clear coat node has an input called clear coat coverage. Basically, it takes the opacity map to see where the coat is applied and where it's not. We can use the input from the same texture to connect to clear coat coverage to make it look slightly better or at least different. We can also play with the mix factor to see what happens if we set it to something different, like 0.9. Note that the influence of a single clear coat is higher and the material is darker in this case. I mentioned multiple ways, so the last example is another way of blending materials using a node called Substrate Vertical Layer. It has two inputs, top material and bottom material. So in my example, single clear coats will be a top one, and substrate slab will be bottom one. And we can see that when we apply that to the object, we see no wood, because water material dominates. And in some way it makes sense, because when we're doing so, we should really have opaque materials or play with opacity and something like that. But for the case like this, Substrate has another node called Substrate Coverage Weight that applies weight for the material layer. So I'm adding this node and connecting it as the next one after the single clear coat node, but before the vertical layer. I need to provide the value for weights, so I'm setting it something like 0.5. Now I've got another way to define multilayer material, and hopefully it's not so hard. We can even do a comparison between two different ways of layering materials. And for that I need to set the value of mix for the horizontal blend to 0.5, basically to ensure that my values for vertical layer and horizontal blends are more or less the same. And I can do comparison by connecting the correct nodes to the front material. Now I can see the difference. So, what have you learned in the last 15 minutes or so? We learned that Substrate is quite a powerful way to create basic and multi-layer materials. It also provides multiple ways of doing the same task, because the visual look might be different. Most importantly, you saw that Substrate is based on the material editor we all use and love. So when Substrate becomes the main editor in Unreal Engine, we'll be ready. That's it for me, and thank you for watching this video. Bye for now.